Hi, my name is May Barber. Welcome to The Creative Hustle. Today, I'll be talking to you about how to price creative work. Now, creative work, whether products or services, have a large portion of intangibility. And this is a challenge. How do we place a financial value and how do we communicate that value to our stakeholders? First, let me start with a story about a banana. Yes, a banana, and you probably heard this story. So in 2019, Italian artist Maurizio Catalan duct taped a banana against a wall in Art Basel, Miami, and the work sold for $120,000. Now, he called this work Comedian, and it was a commentary on consumerism and simply the absurdity of the art world. Now, things got a little bit more absurd later when a performance artist ate the banana, calling his act Hungry Artist, and the gallery then replaced the banana because, as it turns out, the real value of the work was not the actual banana, but was the certificate of authenticity behind it. Fast forward to 2024, the duct-taped banana sold for $6.2 million. And its new owner, cryptocurrency entrepreneur Justin Sun, ate the banana because he also wanted to be part of history. Now, why am I telling you this story? Is to signal and to emphasize that the value of the work is not necessarily in the efforts or the material or the time that goes into it, but it's in the story, in the concept, and the impact behind your work. And that is central to value-based pricing. And value-based pricing is very much an outside-in approach. In my experience, I've seen a lot of designers, especially fashion designers and product designers, using traditional methods of cost-based pricing. Now, in cost-based pricing, they start from designing the product and the service, determining the costs that are associated with it, adding a markup on top, and then that's how they land their final price tag that they then charge to their client. Now, what happens in that process is that not only there's no value communicated, they end up pricing something that is very much irrelevant to what's happening in the landscape of their business. They don't take into consideration the competition, the market conditions, but most importantly, there is no perceived value from the customer. Take, for example, a water bottle. Now ask yourself, how much are you willing to pay for that water bottle? What if I told you that this water bottle has been glass blown by an artisan in Morocco or in the Italian island of Murano? Perhaps you'd be willing to pay a little bit more for that water bottle. Now, what if I told you that this water bottle has been signed by Ronaldo? That adds an additional layer to the perceived value and perhaps might persuade you to pay a little bit more. Of course, that depends if you are a Ronaldo or a Messi fan. But the point is that value-based pricing is an outside-in approach that very much fuels the desire for the client to pay for your products and your service, irrespective of the hours, the effort, the time that you have spent into the making of that product or service. Once you've done value-based pricing, the next step is to communicate that price to your clients. It's important to understand how your client might perceive the price. And some of the frameworks that would help us understand this actually refer to behavioral psychology and the perception of price. And one of them is the anchoring effect. In the anchoring effect, the initial price presented sets the client's expectation of value. So that becomes the anchor. So for example, if you walk into a coffee shop and you see a coffee listed at $10, and then underneath there's another coffee priced at $4, all of a sudden, the $4 doesn't seem so bad because you have been anchored. Your perception was anchored to the $10. This way, if you start with a premium price, you anchor the perception to that value. Compared to if you start low and you build up, the client's perception has already been anchored to that low figure that you may have presented first in your proposal. Another thing to consider is how do you frame your price to your client? Frame your price and position it as an investment rather than an expense. So instead of saying, I will be giving you a logo design or a creative campaign, try to change that language and ask yourself, what would it trigger for my client? So an investment as opposed to a price would yield certain benefits in brand reputation or in visibility or in awareness or any of the other objectives that your clients might have. The world of pricing is actually fascinating, and there are many trends that are reshaping the way brands are pricing their products and services. One very common one that has been enabled by AI today is dynamic pricing. So we see companies like Amazon, for example, changing the price of their items millions of times a day, adjusting according to the competition, according to the demand level, even according to the time of the day. Another trend is peak pricing. This is something that you've probably experienced if you booked an Uber or a Careem at a late hour, perhaps New Year's Eve or after a big event or a concert, and you've experienced that sudden surge or peak of pricing. But I want to focus on trends that are very much relevant to the way we price the intangible, so to value-based pricing. And one key trend that we have witnessed in pricing creative work is ethical pricing. Now, with the rise of the digital age and technology and the rising consumer demand for transparency, many brands are becoming more and more transparent about the cost behind the products and services, even to the extent of adopting what we refer to as radical transparency. A great example of this would be the fashion brand Everlane. Now, I wouldn't have heard of Everlane if it wasn't for the radical pricing approach. If you click on an item and scroll down, you will see the first thing you'll notice is the very typical information that you find in any fashion e-commerce website, like the size, the fitting, the price, the material, etc. But if you scroll further down, you will see line by line every single element and its cost, from the cost of the material to the cost of the labor to transportation to logistics to the duties. Everything is mentioned, and if we do a quick math, you will notice immediately that the price you're paying is actually double the total cost. This is actually a very fair markup if you compare it to many other fashion brands, which could charge up to 8x in terms of pricing. Now, radical transparency has not only become an approach of the way this company is choosing to reveal its pricing, but it has become a key differentiator and a central element to its brand story. And this trend has completely swept through different industries, so not only creative industries, but in hospitality, for example, we see the example of Fogo Islands Inn, a hotel in Canada that's an all-inclusive hotel, charges $2,000 a night, but its founder, Canadian entrepreneur, refers to the pricing approach that she has adopted as economic nutrition labeling. That's right. The price and the breakdown of the price is presented in a format just like the nutrition label. So everything from the cost of the labor to the cost of the food to the experiences to the profit is indicated in there. So if you take a quick look at the nutrition label of Fogo Island, you will notice that 50% of the nightly cost immediately goes to the labor. 15% is reinvested into the company, so the mother company, which actually runs a lot of missions in supporting art, in supporting culture, in working closely with the community, so very much positioning themselves as the social enterprise. And this transparency in pricing is not only part of the pricing policy of this hotel, but it has become a central theme of a larger master theme of honesty, to the extent of the pillowcases you find in your hotel room that has the stitching of the names of the craftspeople who actually made those pillows. Now, I'm not saying that you should reveal everything and put up a nutrition label of all the total cost of your price. However, price is an important element to your brand, to your story, so do not treat it as an afterthought. Before we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with my tips on pricing that will help you craft your next proposal. Build a value narrative. Focus on the outcomes, not only the deliverables, and use a language that your client would understand. Consider using tiered pricing if that is applicable to your product and service. Here, this allows you to actually give different options to your client and make sure that these options are distinct and offer different value. If you can, especially if you are a creative agency, try to opt for a retainer pricing. A retainer pricing is a great way to allow you, first of all, to give you a sense of security, a sense of predictability, but it also allows you to build long, meaningful relationships with your client and truly understand how this organization works. Walk your client through your process. So present in your proposal the different steps that you would be taking and what that means to them. If your first step is the discovery phase, walk them through it. What does this mean? It's about understanding what your client needs. It's about understanding the market. It's about the research. It's about looking at the competition landscape. Walk them through the process before you actually highlight the deliverable. Avoid over-itemizing your items. Again, we don't want to lose the magic here. We're still in the creative business, so you want to mention a certain breakdown. However, if you fall into the trap of over-itemizing your items, your client's perception might be anchored to the lowest value item, and thus this might devalue the whole package. Manage negotiations gracefully. Your client might come to you and say, but this is too expensive. Instead of saying, let me come up with a discount, rephrase the question and ask, what do you want to prioritize? What shall we focus on first? And accordingly tailor the package. And finally, believe in yourself and know your self-worth. I know it might sound cliche. We always talk about self-worth and understanding the value of ourselves. However, when we talk about ourselves as creatives, as creative entrepreneurs and freelancers, often we fall into the trap of self-doubt. We have these challenges. Remember that you are where you are today because of a long journey of learnings, your education, your training, your projects, your experiences, even your mistakes and your challenges, disappointments and rejections. All of these elements allowed you to be who you are today and put you in that position to actually price your product and service. So know your self-worth, know your value, and be confident about communicating it. I'd love to hear your experience with pricing your work, perhaps any challenges you face, or if any of these tips were useful for you. Let me know, and thank you for tuning in. This is May Barber, and you've been listening to The Creative Hustle.